Welcome to Complex Care, A Family Journey, Part 2, presented by the Shrader Family, Dr. Charmaine Wright, and moderated by Lynne Fogel. We'll be jumping right in with caregiver wellness, sibling support, and education. We hope you enjoy.
Okay, well, with that, we'll move on to our topic of caregiver well-being. And the first question under that topic is, how would I know that I am burned out?
You're up.
Okay. I think probably at a baseline, you need to assume you're burned out. I think that from the moment, and Wade again has talked about it, his social worker at DuPont, but Carrie has been fabulous. Even though we came into this world with adult children, I've learned so much from her about caregiver stress and things. The validation for me, the mother of two beautiful, wonderful young men with cerebral palsy, has been immense, even though they're young adults now. I wish I'd heard these things when they were younger. The validation that, it's hard. There are days that it's hard. Coordinating all the appointments, managing all the therapies. I think when they're small and you're trying to, I say, microanalyze every movement as we try to figure out developmentally where they are, and as you were saying, Lynn, about trying to do all the nutrition things before you got to the G-tube. For us, it was trying to make Benjamin move. I wanted his legs to do what I wanted his legs to do. And we spent all our waking hours, trying to get him to sit, or trying to get him to crawl, and trying to motivate, because in my head, in my paradigm, that was the big thing. So I think we need to accept that our baseline is that we are very stressed out. And maybe not burned out, but we're very stressed out, and that is a baseline. We talk a lot here about the fact that because the stress level in our family and in families like ours is already so high, that a little insult to that can cause us to tumble into a catastrophic feeling where we feel like this really is the end of the world. We were moving when the triplets were 2, and we were right in the midst of their diagnosis and kind of coming to terms with the fact that we were looking at long-term disability. And Wade and I were trying to paint our house that we were moving into, and we could not get the edges right. And I got to tell you, it felt like the whole world was going to come tumbling down because we could not figure out how to paint those edges. And a friend said that we just needed to relax. And I just get so sick of hearing that I need to relax. I think we need to say out loud, and we need to say it again, and we need to say it again, that we are not, our baseline is high stress. We are stressed out, and we need to own it, and we need to know it's okay. And that doesn't mean that we don't have joy, or that we're not happy, or that we don't have so much fun, because we do. And I think that my kids would tell you, in their little boxes here, that they would tell you we have a lot of fun, and we're happy as a family, and I adore my children, but the baseline is high stress, and we need to recognize that as families. I think that helps me to have the validation, so I'm offering that validation to you.
I know that in recent years, I get a lot of questionnaires from the teams that I work with, and they ask me questions like, do you ever feel hopeless? Do you feel do you feel depressed? Do you feel like it's the situation with your child is impacting your ability to make it through your day? Those kinds of questions. There's been a noticeable attempt in recent years to collect data from parents of children with special health care needs. And hopefully that data is being used to create strategies to better support the families. Another question that's on this list is, what supports are available for me to access? And I would say they're popping up in all kinds of different places, within hospitals, within schools, within agencies that have the mission of family support. I know in Central Ohio, there have been support opportunities through Easter Seals, through diagnosis specific organizations like Down syndrome and autism, and I started a CP parent support group when my daughter was 2, because I went to a group looking for support, and all the parents there were asking questions that made me know that their children all were on the autism spectrum, and the issues they were discussing didn't really apply to my family. And so after a hour-long conversation in the parking lot with another CP mom, we said, yeah, it just needs to happen. We just need to have a CP group. And that's how our group was born. But there's support to be found now more than ever because of the internet. My group, when it was started in 2004, we had monthly meetings, and people really, really needed to come to those meetings and talk to other parents who get it, right? Who get it. And they would do whatever it took, even, even if they had to bring their kid along to these meetings. And over time, people didn't show up in person to the meetings anymore. And I think it's because there are so many Facebook pages and internet groups and virtual groups out there where you can sit in your PJs at 11 o'clock at night, if that's what you need to do, and post a question. And within an hour, you've got 20 answers to your question from people who are walking the same walk. So it's out there. Support is out there. If you need help finding it, ask for help. Ask a social worker, ask a teacher, ask a service coordinator. But it's out there to be found. Here's a tricky one. My partner's having difficulty accepting a new diagnosis. How can I help?
Okay, we're talking. I think that I often show a picture of Wade and I on our wedding day when I talk about caregiver stress, because that was a day that was all about us. When we became parents to 3 simultaneously. And I don't know that it's been about us since. So we immediately began to look at things in a different way. I had triplets, right? I had newborn triplets. They required everything I had. Wade was in medical school and then subsequently in residency. And he wasn't home, he was working. And when we would come together to talk, it was clear that we were kind of orbiting separate planets. Wade was thinking about tomorrow and what would happen when it was time for the triplets to go to college, and how would the boys be able to do that, and what would college look like for them. And I was trying to make sure 3 babies had their diapers changed, and ate something, and forget this number of calcium that they required, right? Like we were in different places. I think it's hard. I think that we have to, again, it's a validation thing, right? We have to let each other come to acceptance on our own terms, in our own timeline. We have to keep talking. Wade and I were really good about having a date once a year or so during that time.
During residency, yeah.
And so we would try to talk and really talk, and I would try to hear him, and he would try to hear me. We kept talking. We got angry. I got angry because I didn't think he could see what I was seeing. We kept talking. I think that we're a man and a woman and parents, and we come at the whole parenting thing completely differently, and that's okay. I think the timeline for acceptance is different for every person, and we get there on our own. Sometimes we're just holding on to each other while we get to the place of acceptance independently.
There's a family that I take care of, and I think the mom and dad kind of approach the diagnosis in the early early adjustment of, you know, having a child with a disability. I think very similarly, me and Carol. And so I've been able to talk to them about that a good bit. And, you know, I think Carol's right. We definitely were approaching it differently. How we were accepting it was very differently, as she was very optimistic and really focusing on the hope of every day and what the next days would look like. And I was trying to kind of brace myself for the worst. And so I think, you know, I think trying to reach out and helping other families now, you know, who may be walking through that road now, who are, you know, who have that early new diagnosis and trying to deal with it. I just would say, yeah, give each other the grace to be able to adjust to it differently. And talk about it. Talk about those feelings, because everybody does approach it differently, and different parents will approach it differently. Different family members will approach it differently. Siblings, and how you bring that up. I know hopefully we'll talk about that. But I think it's okay that everybody kind of takes it at their own pace, and that hopefully you just keep talking and supporting and loving one another, so that you're able to get through that and give everybody the best family environment you can.
I'll just add, when I teach the pediatric medical students about how to talk and communicate with families who might have new diagnoses, as part of their curriculum, they have to read that poem, Welcome to Holland. And I don't know if you've all read it, but it's basically about you're planning a trip to Italy when you have a baby. You are so excited about what you're going to see. You have the guidebook, maybe you learn some Italian, and then you land in Holland. And so, you know, maybe you're shocked, angry, all the above. Some people are really quick at going to buy the new guidebook and get the language, and some people just sort of sit on the bench and have to absorb that they're in Holland, and it takes some time. And I feel like we need to do better communicating. And I think the most I've learned has come from families telling me what made the difference, what made the difference when they were trying to accept and move through the acceptance of new diagnoses. So we're all trying to be better, but I think conversations like this help me all the time.
Okay, and one more question under caregiver well-being is another tricky one. How can I get my family to understand and support my child? And I think they're probably referring to, you know, extended family, aunts, uncles, parents, grandparents, etc.
You know, I think that's hard. I think it's as hard as the spouses coming at it differently. We had very supportive grandmothers and grandparents, but they didn't know how to handle it. You know, I'll never forget the day we actually got the official diagnosis for the boys. My great aunt called and she said, you know, Carol, I've been thinking, and it's really because they're triplets. And you aren't sitting in the floor with those boys enough and teaching them to sit up. I think this will all be okay if you'll just make time to get, you know, she just was trying to process it and she didn't know how. And of course, there's all this guilt. Like, really, am I not sitting in the floor enough? Do I need to get in the floor more with the boy? Like, I felt like I was in the floor all day long, every day. I think we have, again, the word Wade used was grace, and they were likely coming at this from a whole different generation where they weren't exposed to the wonder and the beauty of children like ours. They don't know what it means. The diagnosis, as any of us who've talked about cerebral palsy knows, it means nothing to say you have CP. I have two boys born minutes apart, both with the same diagnosis, who are completely different in what their cerebral palsy looks like, right? That's just the nature of the diagnosis. I think our older generation doesn't know anything. It's usually about education, talking to them, maybe finding a book. There are lots of resources now for special needs grandparenting, and just trying to help educate while we give them the grace to learn, because I do think ultimately their hearts are probably in the right place. They just don't understand what we're saying and how to move forward.
Okay, any questions from the chat, Jen, about caregiver well-being?
Nope, I think you guys have covered it.
Okay, well, that's a nice segue, talking about family, to move on to our topic of sibling support. And we have two siblings waiting here patiently to give their perspectives. And this is something that I always eagerly want to hear about. My 15-year-old daughter is the sibling in our house, and she is very kind and patient and a wonderful sibling. But I always, as a parent, have that question of when and how much to bring her in on the conversations without making her feel like too much responsibility is being pushed upon her. So I'm eager for this topic. The first question under this is, how can I make sure my able-bodied children feel included?
Okay. Hi. Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely not an expert, first of all, neither one of us. So take whatever we say with a grain of salt. I think one thing, I obviously am going into therapy, so I can speak from that. I loved being a part of my brother's therapy. And actually, my mom sometimes, like when they had a lot of intensive therapies over the summer, would sometimes try to get play dates for me to not have to be at therapy all day. And I was always really mad when she did that. Because I wanted to be there. I wanted to be a part of what they were all doing together. And so I think making the sibling a part of therapy is awesome. And actually, research shows that has tons of benefits for the child with CP as well. So it's meaningful on both ends. So I think that's a really good place to start. And then, yeah, just including them in everything that you do as a family. I think it's hard for kids sometimes to process that, maybe when you're shutting the door on a conversation, you're doing it to protect them, and instead they feel like you have something going on with the other kid that they're not a part of. So I think anytime you're kind of in that space of conversation with the child with disability, just include the sibling too.
I'm going to jump in and say that she's right. We had no idea why this 4-year-old who was getting these lovely play dates arranged for her was so sad and angry at me until she kind of was like, I want to be where they are. I will also add that Mason totally took his cues from her. So at 2, when they were in therapy, she was modeling what we wanted him to do. And now Benjamin was not motivated by her at all. We should say that, right, Benjamin? I mean, Benjamin he was just completely fine ignoring Claire, but Mason really wanted to be doing what she was doing. I think our siblings model behavior often, and so including them is a beautiful way to help them feel a part, to help them develop an ownership. I had a very wise woman tell me when the triplets were 3, and I was, the preschool teacher had said, can Claire dress herself? And I'm like, well, I don't know, but if she could, that would help me a lot. And so she began dressing herself, and I then began to fret, right? Is she doing too much independently? And I'm doing so much for the boys. And this very wise woman said, Carol, this is developing Claire into exactly who she's supposed to be as an adult, just like it's developing the boys into who they're supposed to be. And as I watch her taken tests for occupational therapy school and see the passion she has for working with young children like her brothers once were, I know that woman was exactly right, and that she is exactly who she needs to be. And that was part of growing up right there in the middle of some high stress times. And I'm confident that's true for Cate too, my 14-year-old. And I can't wait to see how it's going to grow her and make, help her become who she needs to be.
Another question was, is it okay that I ask my other children to help their sibling?
Well, dear Lord, yes. I mean, if the preschool teacher had told me that Claire could dress herself and one of the boys, that would have even helped me more. No, I'm kidding. I think that is, there's a fine balance there. We want to have a relationship. For us, it was a unique situation early on because she was the exact same age as her brothers. And then, of course, Cate came along, and, Cate was 2 and sitting in a high chair. I really kind of feel like this was a pivotal moment in her little development. I was feeding Benjamin ice cream. She climbed out of her little high chair, climbed up on the wheels of his wheelchair to wipe his chin because I wasn't doing it correctly or fast enough. So I think there's an innate need to, as Claire was saying, be a part of, but also the younger siblings, their paradigm is one of being needed and meeting the needs. And so I don't think that's a bad thing. I often, see Cate in a helpful leadership role with her peers. And I think she learned that, at a very young age, helping in the things she could do for her brothers. So I think there's a limit.
Agree.
I think there needs to be conversations. We don't want to push them to do things that they're uncomfortable with, but also recognizing that with aging parents, perhaps we need to start including them in some things that they can do. I firmly believe that a family is a family and we take care of each other. So I may say that once or twice at our house.
Well, and in any family full of typical siblings, you're going to ask siblings to help one another when it's called for and when the ability is there. So, yes.
Benjamin helps Cate study for her government classes. Mason, we get Mason on the phone when we need, Latin explained. It's a
sometimes I feel like I might. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Sometimes I feel like I might give a little too much information, a bit over the. We were doing it last year, and I worried about going above the 8th grade level. Too much detail, but I try.
So yes, I think it's okay.
Okay, here's another one. What about making friends, both those with complex needs and their siblings? What's it like to make friends when you have a sibling with a disability or you have a disability?
So I guess we're both talking on that one, boys. I can say, I think, I struggled with making friends when I was younger. And I think part of it was like less about the boys and just more about all the weird stuff that I had going on. But then a part of it was, I still struggle with the way anyone looks at my brothers, or like, I have a hard time sometimes remembering that not everyone comes from a home that has disability in it. And so I'm probably a lot more judgmental than I should be with people and their perceptions of disability. So it's hard for me to kind of have people in my life who don't know disability really, really well, maybe harder than it is for the boys on that. But yeah, they always were my best friends, like when we were younger, and we were kind of always in everything together. And then it's been cool now as I've pursued OT to find like-minded people also passionate about disability care.
Yeah, I mean, speaking from the perspective of someone with a disability making friends, it was hard, especially when I was younger. There is, we found generally kind of caution about and fear about differences is kind of learned surprisingly early on, at least in this culture. And so what we would do that was helpful for us is, because I think fear is often just out of ignorance and lack of education and lack of kind of open conversation about these things, is Benjamin and I would make a point of sort of naming our disability, whether that's I would crack a joke when I fell down, or Benjamin would make a joke about his wheelchair or something. And that it seems trivial, but it was kind of a way to sort of take something that is oftentimes taboo, even in a younger setting, of talking about disability, kind of an elephant in the room, right? It takes that and it says, no, we can't talk about it. You can't ask me questions about it. And it can get tiring once that conversation is kind of open to always be educating people. But we found that kind of when you do open up that conversation, eventually the questions stop and they just become friends. You know, more often than not, there will be people who are still kind of afraid, and even we deal with that now,
Right.
kind of professionally and personally. But ultimately, I think it comes down to just a willingness to educate and communicate about things that might be strange or new to people.
And in the best cases, the friendship becomes that much more meaningful having started out on that foot. Because by starting out making a joke, you've sort of taken away that sort of vulnerability, or rather you've been vulnerable with them, so that the way they know they can have these discussions and make jokes about themselves with you, and they'll want to open up themselves to you in that way.
Yep. Okay, let's see. How about what resources are available to siblings of those with complex needs? Did either of the girls ever participate in like a Sib Shops group or join any sort of group?
I did not participate in Sib Shops, but I actually directed the Sib Shops program of Central Mississippi that Cate also got to participate in. Yeah, Sib Shops are an awesome resource. I recommend them to everyone. We actually do some through the CP program at AI DuPont, so if you're in Delaware, that would be great. And then there's also through the Sibling Support Network that runs the Sib Shops program, there are online sibling support groups through Facebook. So like Sib Teen, Sib 20, SibNet, different programs for different ages. So I definitely recommend those for anyone, really.
And I know that my daughter doesn't do Facebook because it's like the old person's social media. Is there any opportunity like through Instagram or Snapchat or somewhere else that they actually spend time?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. I think the Sibling Support Project definitely needs to kind of shift with the changing times. But, you know, we're all old people still on Facebook.
I will say, I am very active on kind of disability Twitter and its related subgroups, and I do know that there is a kind of burgeoning community of sibling support on Twitter. There's a kind of a community for everything on Twitter, but I definitely know some good people making that happen. So just go and look for hashtags and things. It's out there.
Okay, and finally, when our children get older, I worry that my child's siblings will feel obligated to care for our complex child. How do we plan for the future?
I feel like that's a parent question.
Yeah, I mean, we struggle with that, right? I mean, and our kids are old enough now for us to have some frank conversations about what that looks like. You know, and I think it's important to include everybody's perspectives about that, and to be realistic and talk about it, because it's obviously not a pleasant idea to think about, and so it might be easy to suppress that down and not face it, but it is such an important one, and I know most parents, as we mentioned before, that's a deep down fear and you know, chain that we wear around our neck all the time about what will happen when we're no longer around. And so I think it's incredibly important to talk about it. And I think, you know, I think not to make assumptions, you know, either one way or another about how siblings are going to be involved, or how, you know, how the adult with CP is, how they want their siblings involved, right? Is to try to, as much as we can, get the information out there and try to come up with strategies that works for that individual family.
And I would just
did the focus groups. I will just say, when we did the focus groups, we found that siblings wanted to be asked more. They wanted to be involved more in the process. That was the overwhelming, you know, factor that we found. And part of the sort of guidance and the topics to be covered was to actually give you prompts on how to talk about it. because they are difficult discussions, but I think you shouldn't make assumptions about who wants to be involved and what that looks like.
Okay, Jen, did we have any questions come through the chat about sibling support?
We had one, but the girls covered it beautifully. It was about how you think having siblings with disabilities has impacted your lives, and it's clear. Y'all answered that question well. So let's move on to the next topic.
Okay, our last topic for this evening is education, and I said to my fellow presenters before we started tonight, we could easily do a whole day on education related topics. So I'll just, what I'll do is I'll start with this question here, and then I'll run through some of the other questions that were presented, and I'll let the boys especially, but anyone who wants to weigh in, pick and choose what question jumps out at them that they would want to answer. So we'll start out with, how did it feel to have a disability and to go to school? And did you feel like the school included you and ensured that you were participating?
All right, so I would say it varied from experience to experience. In second grade, in particular, we were in Dallas, Texas, and it was the greatest possible education experience that I could have. We had a system where the teacher, she had a system where you get to be, if you finish all your work, you get to scribe for Benjamin, you get to be his secretary, is what we called it. And so it was, and I got to know a lot of my friends that way, and it was just a great time. In contrast, when we moved to Arizona, we had larger class sizes, a lack of investment, a lack of caring, really, lack of accommodation, and it was it's a very difficult situation. And then when I got to, I should say that we homeschooled through the end of elementary school and all of high school as a result of that. Then when I got to college, it was more of a mixed bag. Some aspects were great, like like my ability to talk to teachers and have them accommodate me, but other things such as living on campus were harder to guarantee. So it really depended on it depended on the specific circumstances.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that is illustrated probably best with the difference between Benjamin and I's college experience. I lived on campus all 4 years. I was an RA for 3 of those 4 years. And like my current plan in life is basically to never leave college. So I liked it. I'm kind of biased. I found that we all went to very small liberal arts schools, and I found that sort of environment allowed me to take complete responsibility for kind of the academic accommodations that I needed. And so to the point where I didn't even have to go through the administration or the ADA office or anything. I could just, by the end of my undergrad, I knew my professors so well that I'd just stop by their office one day at the beginning of the semester and say, we're doing it the same as last semester, right? And they're like, yep, cool, sounds good. And so, yeah, I mean, and I think Benjamin's experience with that was kind of somewhere in between the extremes of good and bad, and so I think
I broke it into tiers. You had, the 8th year of teachers where you didn't have to deal with the ADA office at all. I could come to them personally, and then you had the more B tier where you had to deal with the office and things may not move as fast as we like. So, oh yeah, it was Mason said it right. It was between the two.
And that's not to say that my experience was perfect. My campus was extremely inaccessible. I fought that essentially all 4 years, fought with the administration to make things more accessible. Elevators would break down with me in it all the time.
Same.
And so, Benjamin had the same thing. So it was not a perfect experience by all means, but the level of independence that was granted to me is something that I love. So.
And just to kind of wrap up what our experiences was, I think what I try to tell patients that ask me about it and families that ask me about it, I think it's important to find out the culture of that school. You know, the ADA office is important, and certainly you have to look at accessible buildings and what the dorm rooms might look like and all of that. But I really found, what we found was, it was really how the school responded. And I think by and large, both of the boys' school responded really well in a positive way, where most of the administration and most of their professors really were happy to be, active supporters of their academic success.
Okay, well, another question here. I'll, like I said before, I'll run through some of the questions that were lobbed here for education, and maybe one or two of them will jump out at you as ones that you specifically have some examples for. How can I advocate for support for my child at school? What support is my child entitled to? Will there be specialized equipment for my child at school? And will my child be able to get help with their learning?
Yeah, I mean, I think we looked around at a lot of different colleges.
Are we talking about college or?
You're talking about college, right? Is that right? Or are you talking about?
Well, I don't know. It could be talking about any age, really.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's important to note that things do change a lot when they go to college, right? And so that school environment from early on, which has the IEP process, that has a lot of therapies involved, those are in place to help maximize our kids' potentials. And so, I think there definitely are opportunities and venues through most public school systems to give a lot of those specialized resources. But, I think that varies so much from district to district, and it varies very much from state to state about those resources. And so, it's not surprising in a country like ours that you can hear people with wildly different experiences for the same type of services in terms of therapy services and specialty devices and gait trainers and walkers and all of that really does, unfortunately, show a lot of the heterogeneity of our educational system.
It's true, but there is that idea, right, that is a federal mandate, and it guarantees rights for any individual with disabilities to a free and appropriate public education across the country. It looks different, a lot different from state to state and district to district, but at a basic level, it's guaranteed, and a parent has the right to advocate for what their child needs. As far as specialized equipment goes, I'll say over time, there have been times when I've been surprised at the equipment that was offered up by my child's school to help her. And there have been other times where I said to the school, hey, look, somebody gave us this and we don't need it at home, but could you use it at school with her or with another child? And they've been thrilled to accept that as a donation from us and said, thank you so much. We have other students who will really be able to use this. So thinking creatively about sharing the wealth and never be afraid to ask, because you never know what might be provided. and think creatively about resources and where they can come from, would be some advice I would have. I think we are really winding down with our time, and we've maxed out our time on this session. I want to thank everyone for participating tonight. Jen, were there any last questions that have been entered in the chat box that we can address before we wind it up?
Yeah, I had a good one. I have a good one for Benjamin and Mason. How do you think your parents' contribution when growing up has supported your success today?
Oh, it's hard to put into words, honestly. It's so, like, I wouldn't have had the level of self-confidence, the level of just knowledge generally. I don't think I'd be anywhere near that without their investment in me. And what I try to do in all respects is to live up to the work that they did and are doing on my behalf.
Yeah, I mean, I think Claire said earlier, right, that it's so important for families to include everybody on the conversation around disability at all times. And I think mom and dad really modeled that and are modeling that throughout our whole lives. And that had that inclusion of like always knowing what's going on with any surgeries either of us might need and why we would need them, and always being able to talk through those things has enabled both of us, I think, to really to work towards independence and to be self-advocates. And so I don't think we would be able to do any of the things we've done in adulthood thus far without that. So.
Okay.
Go
ahead.
We had one comment, Alexis. You gotta be quick. We're coming up on a long presentation. But I know you're so articulate, and I would love for you to speak up.
Alrighty, thank you. I think it'll be worth it. So I just wanted to say to each of the presenters, I have loved this presentation so much. I'm so thankful to sit here and listen and be a part of it. So thank you everyone who has presented. And Ben and Mason, I laughed at your stories getting stuck in the elevator. I'm waiting for the day that it happens to me. I know it's gonna happen. I'm actually looking forward to it because I want to see how that's gonna work out. I really do. And then Carol, I think one of the most amazing things that you said, I wanted to thank you for validating the experiences that we go through. And I know that the question was directed toward caregivers, talking about high stress environments, but sitting here listening to you, I never realized, obviously being born with CP, this is the life that I know. It's the only life that I know, and it's a great life. But I didn't realize until I got older that it was a high stress environment. Again, like I said, with it being the only thing that I know, high stress is what I know. And the ability to have you validate that is absolutely amazing. So thank you for that. And then I think another point that I took away from that I'd like to point out is realizing that even though there may be a grieving process for parents when the child gets a new diagnosis, there's probably that same grieving process for the adult with CP or any diagnosis when they transfer into adulthood or into adult care, because I've never had an issue with my CP as a kid, and I don't really think I have an issue with it now. I love it. It makes me who I am. But going back to what I was saying earlier, there were all these services out there for me when I was a kid, and now there's not. And it's such a helpless feeling. I know there's hope, and I know that good's going to come out of it because of that's just the way life is. There's always something good. But I think acknowledging that there might be a grieving process for adults with CP as well, or any person when they get come to terms with their diagnosis, but especially when they become an adult and transfer out into adult care. That was not quick, but worth it.
Absolutely, Alexis, and you're exactly right. And while while I say there's high stress, you need to know there's also high joy, and there's a bright future, and that future is bright for you.
Yes,
And,
yes.
and so you need to embrace that as well.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
think that was the thing that really got me when you said that, was you talked about the joy too, because a lot of times it's either, people either talk one or the other, and you have both. And it's just amazing that you brought that up.
Oh, thank you, Alexis.
That's it from the chat box.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for being here and for having this great conversation. I think that families all over the country are going to really benefit from it and be glad they tuned in.
Thank y'all for
Thank you
including
so
us.
much.
Thank you.